These are the 12 apostles. It is a reminder to us that these men who often end up in stained glass windows, they are not the spiritual giants that we think they are when Jesus finds them. But by the sheer grace of God, through their lives and through their witness and their ministry, the world was transformed and the church was built.
Welcome to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths. I'm Steve Hiller. We're continuing a message today called The Kingdom Advancing, taking a look at how Jesus really did commission those early apostles to go out with his message, the gospel message, to a world that needed to hear that, a message that we need to continue to share today.
Well, that's right. And it's so encouraging, I think, Steve, when we look into the lives of the apostles and get to know them a little bit better, which we're going to in our passage today, to see how very ordinary they were, how very flawed, how very human. And I think seeing that, it encourages us in a couple of ways. It shows us that the power comes from Jesus, the work of building the church and getting the gospel out. Ultimately, it flows from him, and it's not due to human agency. That's one thing, and that's encouraging just to see. And it's also encouraging to see that God is able to use very, very ordinary and very, very flawed people for his work, and I think that gives us hope.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I know I look at my life, I look at the lives of others that I have the opportunity to do ministry with sometimes, and I think, man, how amazing is it that God, the creator of the universe, allows us to be a part of what he's doing, but he chooses to use broken vessels.
That's right. And it's great for us to see that and be reminded of it as we are in the passage today.
That passage is Matthew chapter 10, so grab a Bible and join us there as we continue the message, The Kingdom Advancing. Here is Jonathan.
In our neighborhood, there's a new retirement home being built. I think it's going to be a pretty big one, judging by the giant hole they've dug in our village. We've been watching the work progress a little bit over recent weeks. They've just laid the foundations, actually, and it's actually quite impressive to look at. It's become clear that this will be a really very big building. Huge concrete foundation going 2 or 3 stories deep into the ground. On one level, it's not a very exciting phase of the build. You're not seeing too much coming up into the air yet, but it's so vital for this to be done right, isn't it? If the foundation is good, the building is going to stand the test of time. And in a sense, here in Matthew chapter 10, we are having a good look at the foundations of the church of Jesus Christ. We are seeing what it is all built on, seeing that Jesus laid the foundation himself. And seeing that and knowing that, we're given confidence that the thing is solid. And so the lesson for us here, well, the lesson is not primarily that we are to go out and do all the things that the apostles did. The lesson here is that you and I need to have confidence in the apostolic message and the apostolic word. We should have confidence in the New Testament scriptures. It's worth remembering that Jesus himself did not sit down and write any of the New Testament. Ultimately, he gave that authority, that responsibility over to these apostles. He superintended it by his Spirit, of course, but the apostles did the work. And here in our passage, we're being told simply that these guys are legitimate. It's a big point. It's foundational stuff. We need to have confidence in the apostolic teaching and believe the apostolic word, because their mission, it carries the stamp of authority of Jesus Christ himself. That's a big takeaway. Next and third, the apostolic mission demonstrates God's great power in weakness. I think it's possible for us to put the apostles of Jesus Christ on pedestals and to carve their images in stone in cathedrals and name churches after them. That's been done down through the centuries, of course. And of course, these men were greatly used of God, and we do have cause to be thankful for them. But they weren't superhuman, far from it. Just notice some highlights from the list of names. We won't go through every biography in detail. Simon Peter. Simon Peter was notorious for getting things a little bit wrong, for being slow to believe, and then ultimately for denying Jesus 3 times. He was, in a sense, the lead apostle. His name often tops the lists, but his failure at that final and that crucial hour when everyone else had deserted Christ, his failure is all the more dramatic in light of his privilege. James and John, well, they were elsewhere called sons of thunder, and it actually wasn't a bad nickname for them. Quick to react, even to overreact, rather too self-interested at times, even asking for thrones at Jesus' right and left hand in his kingdom. Then there's Thomas, known most famously for doubting Jesus at the resurrection. Matthew reminds us in verse 3 that he himself was a tax collector, an Israelite who collaborated with the Romans and really, in a sense, betrayed his own people. He was seen as the lowest of the low in Jewish society. A number of these men were fishermen, ordinary laborers of low social standing, little education, not much wealth. And then, of course, there's Judas Iscariot, the famous traitor. And even here in the text, Matthew adds the reminder that he would turn against Jesus. Ordinary men, unimpressive men, sinful men, even one a traitor. Jesus doesn't go for the A team here. They're not even the B team. It's always stunning to hear the prices that are paid for professional sports players by professional sports teams. The prices that a team will pay to get the player they feel will be their silver bullet, their secret weapon. I was reading yesterday of a $100 million contract extension that the Edmonton Oilers have paid for their star player. That is an astronomical amount of money. But I gather that NHL players don't even feature in the global rankings of the highest paid athletes around the world. No, the global rankings for pay belong to the soccer, football, and basketball players. And the numbers there, they are almost incomprehensible. Nevertheless, a star is evidently worth paying for in the world of professional sports. But these guys, these 12, these are the guys you would pay to get rid of from your team. If you could trade them, you would. They're not superstars. They're anything but. And yet Jesus chose them. Jesus used them. It is a reminder to us that these men who often end up in stained glass windows aren't actually the heroes of the hour. They are not the spiritual giants that we think they are when Jesus finds them. It's a reminder to us that the growth of the church, and if you like, the success of the movement, it was never down to Jesus' genius of talent spotting. The church grew, the scriptures were written, the kingdom spread only because God, by his Spirit, did a very powerful work. He did it, and he alone. On their own, these guys could barely have organized a good church picnic. But by the sheer grace of God, through their lives and through their witness and their ministry, the world was transformed and the church was built. Now, just remembering that simple fact sparked by just this list of names here, familiar names, remembering that fact, it guards the glory as belonging only to God and God alone. Remembering this, it causes us to praise him for his work and not to allow the credit to go elsewhere. And remembering this, well, it reminds us in our day that the key to success in ministry, the key to fruitfulness, the key to gospel growth in our day and age, it's not about spotting the right talent. It is instead about trusting the right Lord. But the Lord uses weak, and he uses ordinary people. He uses me, and he uses you. And he does that again and again and again so that we will rely upon him for his strength and give him glory for his work. I enjoy reading biography, and I generally find it pretty encouraging to read biographies of great Christian leaders. I find it encouraging because it so often reminds me of how flawed they were, how their great gifts were so often mixed with great weaknesses. I'm reading an excellent biography of Jonathan Edwards at the moment, the outstanding New England preacher of the Great Awakening. Edwards was a highly gifted preacher and teacher, a great intellectual, and he was mightily used of God. But the biographer makes it clear that he had tremendous weaknesses as well. And it's good just to see that. It's good just to know that about our heroes of church history. It gives the rest of us hope of being useful, actually, because we all know how flawed we are. And it points the spotlight on God again and again and again. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul speaks of his own weakness and his own frailty as a minister of the gospel. And he says that the treasure of the gospel comes in very weak containers, vessels like him. And it comes that way for a reason. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 7, but we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power, the power of the gospel proclaimed for the salvation of sinners, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. And of course, it is a reminder, a humbling and an encouraging reminder that God continues to use weak and ordinary people to do his work. He set a pattern here with his apostles, but it does continue today. We know it continues today. He's able to use me. He is able to use you. Our usefulness to him depends not on our intelligence, not on our social standing, not on our giftedness. It depends upon our availability to the Lord, who can use anyone. He can use even the most weak and even the most ordinary people to do extraordinary things in his purposes for the kingdom. An interesting little aspect of this commission is the whole matter of Jesus telling the apostles not to take extra provisions for their journey. Maybe that stood out for you in verse 9. Don't take any gold or silver or copper in your belts and so on. And then Jesus goes on to say that they should expect to be able to stay with worthy people and just find lodgings wherever they go. Don't worry about the material practicalities. Your needs are just going to be provided for. Now, interestingly, this command doesn't seem to be permanent. It's not that the apostles should never make provision, or that all Christian workers and missionaries should never be concerned about support or planning or anything like that. No, that doesn't seem to be the case. This isn't recorded in Matthew's gospel, but near the end of Luke's gospel in chapter 22, he actually records Jesus reversing this instruction and telling the apostles now to take a purse and a bag and even to buy a sword. They should make preparations before they go out. You see, here in Matthew 10, this is a temporary instruction. But it seems to me that it is here to demonstrate and to prove something significant. It's here to demonstrate and to prove the Lord's sufficiency and his power to provide everything that is needed for his work. This weak and this somewhat ill-suited group of guys will go off with empty pockets and no suitcase. And by the sheer power and the sheer grace of God, they will be his agents of salvation to many people. God is going to make provision for them at every turn. He'll enable them to get the job done. And it will be crystal clear for all to see that God has done something wonderful. He's done it through his might, and he's done it for his glory.
You're listening to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths and a message called The Kingdom Advancing. It's part of a larger series from the book of Matthew called Kingdoms Colliding, and today we're continuing a message we began last time, looking at the first 17 verses of Matthew chapter 10. If you missed that broadcast, you can always come to our website and listen to each and every program online. Just stop by encounterthetruth.org. There you can stream the program or download an MP3. Again, it's encounterthetruth.org. Well, let's get back to the message. Once again, here is Jonathan.
Fourthly and finally, the apostolic mission brings a divided response. We've just been through a provincial election, and we're soon enough going into a federal election. And around election times, we know the experience of volunteer campaigners landing on our doorstep and urging us to vote for their candidate. Now, when that happens, we expect the campaigners to be all charm, all positive. If you give them a greeting and some of your time, they're absolutely delighted. If you respond negatively, part of their role and part of their mandate is to react graciously to that and not to make the candidate look bad by being aggressive or angry or anything like that. They still want to win, and they still hope to grab your vote. Now, if the apostles of Jesus Christ were being sent out as campaigners, were being sent out to win votes for their leader, you'd expect some lessons at this point in PR, in charm, in how to win friends and influence people. That should be here in chapter 10. But the instructions that Jesus actually gives his apostles in verse 11 and following, they have a bit more of an edge to them. I wonder if you noticed. There is a real negative side here. In recent verses, we've seen a lot of the compassionate heart of Jesus. He looked on those crowds and he had compassion on them, seeing that they were as sheep without a shepherd. He sends his apostles out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, concerned to gather them in and to care for them. He commissions them to preach the gospel of salvation and to heal diseases and to release the oppressed and so on. This is a mercy mission on which the apostles will go. But there is an edge to this mission. The Lord whom the apostles represent, he is the Lord of kindness. He is the Lord of salvation. But he is also the coming judge of all the earth. And their mission, well, it will be to proclaim this fact. Their words and their actions will drive it home. And as for the people they meet, well, their response to the apostles and their response to the apostolic gospel, it is going to be a divided response, and they need to be prepared for it. The apostles need to expect that and plan for it. And actually, the way in which people respond to them and to their message, it is going to give a foretaste and an indication of how those people will fare on the coming day of judgment. Jesus doesn't send these guys out telling them to beg for a hearing. No, they don't go out begging. They go as royal messengers, envoys of Jesus Christ. And the onus is on the hearers to welcome them and to receive them. They're to seek out, verse 11, some worthy person to stay with. Presumably that means someone who is prepared to listen to the message and to respond to it. Bring your greeting into the home, he says. If the home is found to be worthy, if there is indeed a response, let your peace rest upon it. But if not, you revoke that blessing. And more than that, if someone won't welcome you, if someone won't listen to the message, if a community won't listen to the message, shake the dust off your sandals as a sign of judgment, as a sign that you have no more business in that place and with those people, as a sign that the salvation of God has not come to them. And then after those hard words comes the real bombshell in verse 15. The most notoriously wicked town in all the Old Testament history, it will have an easier time when it comes to the day of judgment than that community that has rejected the apostles and rejected the message. Why is that? Well, Sodom and Gomorrah may have been wicked places, but they never once had an apostle of Jesus Christ come and bring the gospel of salvation to them. That city never had that privilege. But to receive the message, to hear the message, to have an apostle come to you, and then to reject the message and to reject the apostles of Jesus Christ, well, that is a very serious thing. It is a serious thing because it means rejecting Jesus Christ himself. Sometimes the idea goes around that the God of the Old Testament, well, he was a God of judgment, but the God of the New Testament, he is by contrast a God of grace and a God of mercy. That's a very common idea. Perhaps you've heard it, perhaps you've thought it. It's as though the Bible really presents two different gods to us, one of the Old Testament, one of the New. But actually, when we read the Scriptures carefully, the Old Testament is full of the grace and the mercy of God, the kindness of God. And if we listen carefully to the teaching of Jesus Christ, we realize that he speaks plainly and often about the coming day of judgment. And he sends out his apostles with his word, and as he does so, he says that the work of judgment is going to be woven into their mission. Just as Jesus received a divided response from the people he preached to and the people he ministered to, so too will the apostles receive a divided response. And the response of the people to the apostles and to their message, their response will actually reveal where they are with the Lord and how they will fare on the day of judgment. For political campaigners, anything short of an enthusiastically positive response, it is a failure and it is a loss. But when it comes to representing Jesus Christ, a mixed response is a mark of authenticity for the messenger. It's a mark of authenticity because it is the kind of response that Jesus himself received. It's good to see that expectation laid out here plainly. It's actually important to see that it was laid out plainly because we know from reading the rest of the New Testament that the apostles would indeed receive a very mixed response. The apostle Paul was famously rejected in many places he went. He was even imprisoned and very likely martyred. Tradition has it that most of these 12 men would actually ultimately be martyred for their witness and their ministry. And if Jesus hadn't set out this expectation here, we might actually question what was going on. Were the apostles on the right track? Why did people reject them so strongly? Was Paul genuine? He seemed like a bit of a failure in some ways. Isn't rejection a sign of failure? It looks like it. But no, as Jesus sets out the dynamics of their mission here, he calibrates our expectations and he sets them right for us. It's sobering to reflect on this reality, on this aspect of the apostles' mission, but it is important for us to reflect on it. It's important because the apostolic gospel that we today proclaim, the apostolic word that we believe and that we teach, it continues to divide. We should expect a mixed response in our day and in our age. And we need to recognize the implications of that response. When men and women, boys and girls, welcome the apostolic message, we see evidence of salvation. We see positive signs for the day of judgment. But when others reject the message, reject the apostolic word, well, their rejection speaks of a very sobering reality. It speaks of the fact that they're not ready for judgment, that they're not safe as they approach that final day. And it tells us that the judgment will not be bearable for them. And knowing that, mindful of that, recognizing that, any instinctive frustration or disappointment that you and I might feel at that rejection, and we'll receive plenty of rejection as we share the good news of salvation, any frustration we feel, well, it should be turned to sorrow and it should be turned to prayer. When the gospel is rejected, the tragedy is not that you or I have been slighted. The tragedy is that a person's rejection is a warning of judgment to come. The closing instructions of Jesus at the end of our passage were vitally important for the apostles, but they do remain just as relevant to us today. Verse 16, notice it with me. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. This week, as we go with the apostolic message, with the apostolic word, into a sometimes hostile world, we go as sheep belonging to the great shepherd. Jesus has spoken a fair bit just recently about his compassion on lost sheep. Sheep without a shepherd, the lost sheep of Israel. We go into the world as sheep, but we go as sheep who have been found by the shepherd and as those who belong to him. Vulnerable, sure, but protected as well. And as he called the apostles to be shrewd in their day, he calls us to be shrewd in ours. Careful with our words, sensitive to our context. But at the same time, being shrewd, we don't manipulate, we don't compromise the message. By his help, we're to go out as his agent, innocent as doves, just trusting his word, trusting his power, trusting his provision, and leaving the work of judgment to him for that final day.
Really a compelling look today at the apostolic mission of the church. You're listening to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths. And if you missed any of the 4 points as we've taken a look at this mission, I'd encourage you to come to our website and listen to this broadcast and any previous broadcast in the series called Kingdoms Colliding. We like to put every message there, and that way you can keep up with Jonathan's teaching. And as you give a gift of support, you help us stay on the air. You help us bring Jonathan's teaching to the station each day. And so if you're benefiting from listening, I want to encourage you to give a gift. And as you do, we want to say thank you by sending you a book called Checkbook of the Bank of Faith. It's written by a great Victorian preacher named C.H. Spurgeon. He was one of the most influential people of the second half of the 19th century, and he had a desire that his people would know a pastoral ministry. And this devotional book from C.H. Spurgeon is our gift to you as you give a gift of any amount to Encounter the Truth this month. You can give online at encounterthetruth.org or when you call us at 833-99-TRUTH. That's 833-998-7884. And if you'd like to drop a check in the mail, that's easier for you. Our address is Encounter the Truth, 2176 Prince of Wales Drive, Ottawa, Ontario, K2E0A1. Well, thanks for doing that and for listening today, and I hope you'll join us next time.